If you want to completely destroy a man, you don't scream, and you don't threaten. You simply wait for the absolute happiest day of his life, put on your most elegant dress, and let the truth do the tearing. The heavy oak doors of the cathedral felt cool beneath my fingertips. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of white lilies and the hushed whispers of the city's elite. Down the aisle, Liam, my stepbrother, the man who stole my family's empire and banished me to a remote psychiatric facility 7 years ago, stood waiting for his beautiful, clueless bride. He looked immaculate, untouchable. He truly believed the terrified 19-year-old girl he had locked away was erased forever. He thought he had won. I slipped into the back pew, adjusting the dark veil of my hat. I wasn't here to make a scene just yet. I was simply waiting for the priest to ask for objections. Because Liam forgot one tiny, federal detail when he scammed his way to the top, he forgot to divorce me first. As the string quartet's soft melody drifted through the cavernous cathedral, my mind was violently pulled back to the nightmare that began exactly 7 years ago. I am Clara. I was just 19 when my world collapsed. My biological father, a titan in the tech industry, passed away suddenly, leaving his entire estate and the controlling shares of his company to me. I was devastated, drowning in grief, and utterly alone in a mansion that suddenly felt like a tomb. That's when they made their move. My stepmother Martha and her son Liam, my stepbrother, didn't offer comfort. They offered a cage disguised as a rescue. There was no physical force, no locked doors or bruised wrists. They used something much more insidious: systemic manipulation and legal terror. Days after the funeral, while I could barely eat or sleep, Liam cornered me in my father's study. He painted a terrifying picture of a hostile corporate takeover. He convinced me that my father's ruthless rivals were circling like vultures, ready to strip me of everything and dismantle the legacy my father had bled to build. "I can protect it for you, Clara," Liam had said, his voice dripping with fake sincerity. "But I need legal authority. We need a shield." That shield, he claimed, was a temporary legal maneuver. He slid a thick stack of documents across the mahogany desk. I was so exhausted, so desperately missing my father, that the legal jargon blurred together. I just wanted the fear to stop. I trusted my family. I signed exactly where he pointed. I didn't realize until much later that buried beneath the complex trust agreements and power of attorney forms was a civil marriage certificate. No white dress. No vows. Just a stroke of a pen that legally bound my entire inheritance to his control under state property laws. The betrayal didn't end there. Within 48 hours of securing my signature, Martha brought in a private psychiatrist, a close friend of hers, no doubt heavily compensated. I was pronounced dangerously exhausted, emotionally unstable, and a severe threat to my own well-being. Before the shock could even register, my belongings were packed. I was escorted into a black SUV and driven entirely off the grid to a highly restricted wellness retreat hidden deep in the mountains. My phone was confiscated upon arrival. My letters outward were intercepted and destroyed. I was effectively erased from the world, kept quiet and isolated, while Liam returned to the city to parade around as the brilliant, self-made CEO of my father's empire, funding his lavish lifestyle with my stolen trust fund. But they made a fatal miscalculation. They assumed isolation would break me. Instead, it gave me time. Over those 7 years, the fog of grief lifted, replaced by a razor-sharp, cold clarity. The facility had a small, outdated library, and I befriended a sympathetic night nurse who secretly smuggled in current corporate law textbooks and financial journals. While Liam was busy living my life, spending my money, and planning his political ascent, I was sitting in a sterile room, meticulously studying the exact laws he used to trap me. I wasn't the broken girl they told the board of directors I was. I was a prisoner of greed, quietly building my own key to get out. The cathedral was a sea of opulence, a masterclass in the kind of wealth that doesn't need to shout to be heard. I sat motionless in the back pew, a shadow swallowed by the sheer scale of the St. Jude Cathedral. Around me, the city's political elite, business tycoons, and socialites mingled in hushed, reverent tones. The air was thick with the suffocating scent of hundreds of imported white lilies and the subtle notes of expensive designer perfumes. Every rustle of silk, every clinking of a Rolex, was a reminder of the world Liam had stolen from me. My eyes tracked the front row, locking onto a familiar figure draped in emerald green silk. Martha, my stepmother. She glided to her VIP seat with the practiced elegance of a monarch taking her throne. But it wasn't her smug posture that made my blood run cold. It was the heavy, breathtaking vintage diamond necklace resting against her collarbone. It was my late mother's necklace, the one my father swore would be mine on my wedding day. My fingers curled into tight fists in my lap, my manicured nails digging into my palms until they ached. I closed my eyes, forcing a slow, measured breath. Not yet, Clara, I reminded myself, the mantra keeping me grounded. Let them enjoy their stolen kingdom for just a few minutes more. Then my gaze shifted to the foyer. Chloe, the bride, was preparing for her grand entrance alongside her father, the governor. She looked undeniably beautiful, wrapped in layers of custom French lace, her veil catching the soft light of the stained glass windows. She was radiant, nervous, and entirely innocent. She had no idea that the charismatic, handsome CEO she was about to marry was a parasite. Liam didn't love her. He loved her pedigree. Marrying into her family was Liam's final, calculated move to secure political immunity and ultimate power. To him, Chloe was just another asset to acquire. Several late-arriving guests brushed past my pew, murmuring polite apologies without ever really looking at me. Their eyes slid right over my wide-brimmed black hat and tailored, dark silhouette. To them, I was just a nameless acquaintance. If anyone in this room even remembered Clara, they remembered a fragile, weeping 19-year-old girl who had lost her mind. They couldn't possibly recognize the woman sitting before them, a woman whose spine had been forged in the fires of absolute betrayal. 7 years of isolation had burned away my naivety, leaving behind nothing but cold, calculated resolve. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't crying. I was a predator sitting quietly in the shadows, watching the thieves celebrate their heist. The soft murmur of the crowd began to die down. The heavy, ambient noise of the cathedral shifted, replaced by an expectant silence. At the altar, Liam stepped into view. He adjusted his bespoke tuxedo cuffs, offering a $1 million smile to the crowd. He looked perfectly at ease, basking in the adoration of his peers, completely unaware that the floor beneath him was a trapdoor waiting to be sprung. The soft strings of the quartet faded, replaced instantly by the deep, bone-rattling chords of the church organ. As the first notes of the traditional wedding march echoed through the vaulted ceilings, the entire congregation rose as one. I stood with them, a solitary figure draped in black among a sea of vibrant pastels, remaining perfectly concealed in the shadowy rear of the cathedral. At the end of the long aisle, Chloe appeared. With her arm looped tightly through her father's, the governor, she looked breathtaking, a vision of pure, untainted hope. I shifted my gaze to the altar. Liam's face was a masterclass in manufactured devotion. As Chloe drew nearer, he reached up and wiped a single, expertly timed tear from his cheek. A collective sigh of adoration rippled through the pews. What a flawless performance, I thought, my own pulse remaining dangerously calm. He played the role of the love-struck groom just as flawlessly as he had played the concerned, protective brother 7 years ago. He was minutes away from committing attempted bigamy in front of the city's highest-ranking lawmakers, yet he stood there looking like a prince. The governor kissed his daughter's cheek and proudly placed her hand into Liam's. Liam clasped it firmly, offering a reassuring magnetic smile before they both turned to face the altar. The priest, a dignified man with silver hair and a booming, resonant voice, raised his hands to bless the gathering. "Please be seated," he instructed. The guests lowered themselves into the wooden pews in a synchronized rustle of expensive silk and tailored suits. I, however, remained standing in the very back row, a silent sentinel waiting for my cue. The priest began his homily. He spoke passionately of love as a foundation of absolute truth. He spoke of honesty, of stripping away all deception, and of building a lifelong union upon a bedrock of unbreakable trust. The suffocating hypocrisy of his words echoing off the ancient stone walls was almost deafening. Liam nodded earnestly along with the sermon, holding Chloe's hands, his thumbs gently stroking her knuckles. It turned my stomach. He was standing in a sacred place, preparing to vow his life to this innocent woman, while his legal wife, the stepsister whose life he had stolen and locked away, watched from the shadows. The homily concluded, and the atmosphere in the room visibly tightened. We were reaching the precipice. The point of no return. The priest opened his gilded book and stepped forward, his eyes scanning the sea of wealthy, influential guests. He took a deep breath, the microphone catching the subtle intake of air. The cathedral went pin-drop silent. Not a cough, not a whisper. The moment I had been meticulously plotting for 2,555 agonizing days had finally arrived. The priest's voice boomed through the hidden speakers, washing over the breathless crowd. If anyone here can show just cause why these two may not lawfully be joined together in holy matrimony, speak now, or forever hold your peace. A heavy, comfortable silence settled over the room. Liam offered Chloe a soft, reassuring smile, his thumb gently caressing her hand. He thought he had crossed the finish line. I stepped out from the shadows of the back pew and directly into the center aisle. Click, click, click. The sharp, deliberate sound of my stilettos striking the marble floor echoed like gunshots in the cavernous space. At first, only a few heads in the back rows turned, perhaps assuming a guest was quietly slipping out. But I wasn't heading for the doors. I was marching straight for the altar. I have an objection. My voice wasn't a scream. It was calm, icy, and perfectly measured. But in that dead-silent church, it sliced through the heavy air like a freshly sharpened blade. A collective gasp rippled through the pews. Hundreds of heads snapped around in unison. Up at the altar, Liam's perfect, million-dollar smile froze. As his eyes tracked down the long aisle and finally locked onto my face, now fully visible beneath the brim of my hat, the color violently drained from his skin. The charismatic, untouchable CEO dissolved in a fraction of a second, replaced instantly by a terrified man staring at a ghost. He took a stumbling step backward, nearly tripping over the hem of Chloe's dress. In the VIP row, Martha stood up so fast her wooden chair scraped loudly against the stone. Her hand flew to her throat, clutching my mother's vintage diamond necklace as if the jewels were suddenly strangling her. Her jaw unhinged, but no sound came out. She looked as though the floor had just vanished beneath her feet. Miss. The priest stepped forward, his brow furrowed in deep confusion, his hands hovering over his open book. Excuse me, but this is a highly private ceremony. Who are you? I didn't stop walking. I didn't blink. I kept my eyes locked in a death stare with my stepbrother. 30 feet. 20 feet. I stopped just short of the altar steps, planting my feet firmly. The entire political and financial elite of the city watched in stunned, breathless paralysis. Liam, Chloe whispered, her voice trembling as she looked frantically from me to her paralyzed groom. Liam, what is going on? Who is this woman? Liam opened his mouth, but only a pathetic, strangled sound escaped. He was suffocating on the impossible reality standing in front of him. The disposable girl he had thrown away had come back to collect. I raised my chin, my posture radiating the absolute authority of a CEO reclaiming her boardroom. My gaze swept past the bewildered governor, past a hyperventilating Martha, and settled squarely on the trembling groom. I am Clara, I declared, letting my name echo off the vaulted ceilings for the first time in 7 years. And he cannot marry this woman today, because I do not consent. A tidal wave of frantic whispers erupted among the socialites and politicians, but I cut through the noise with my final, devastating strike. I looked right at the bride. My voice softened just a fraction, acknowledging the innocent collateral damage standing next to a monster. He can't marry you, Chloe, I said, the words ringing out with absolute, undeniable finality. Because I am his first wife. And under the law, we are still very much married. Chaos erupted. The absolute silence of the cathedral shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces of disbelief. The governor's face went from pale shock to a furious, mottled red. Chloe physically recoiled, dropping Liam's hands as if his skin had suddenly caught fire. She scrambled down the altar steps, clutching her veil and seeking refuge behind her father. "She's lying," Liam shouted. The smooth, confident baritone he had used to charm the city's elite cracked with raw, unfiltered panic. He pointed a trembling, desperate finger at me. "She's sick. I don't know her. She's a stalker, a severely delusional patient who escaped from a psychiatric ward. Security. Someone get her out of here immediately." I didn't flinch. I didn't back away. I stood my ground and let him scream his lies into the microphone, letting his desperation bleed into the air for everyone to witness. When he finally ran out of breath, I let out a laugh. It wasn't hysterical or unhinged. It was a cold, hollow sound of absolute authority that cut right through the frantic murmurs of the crowd. "A patient?" I asked, my voice dripping with disdain. I calmly unclasped my designer handbag and pulled out a thick, heavy manila envelope. "That's an interesting narrative, Liam. But I am the sole heir to the estate you've been draining for 7 years. And I am entirely legally sane." Martha finally found her legs. She rushed forward from the VIP pew, her emerald dress rustling violently. "Clara, stop this madness right now," she hissed, trying to keep her tone authoritative, but failing miserably. "You are embarrassing yourself. You need medical help. Put those away." "The only people who should be embarrassed right now are you and your son, Martha," I retorted, holding the envelope up high for the entire congregation to see. "Right here, I have the certified, unannulled civil marriage certificate signed by Liam and myself 7 years ago. But that's not even the best part." I pulled out a thick stack of papers bound with a heavy legal clip. "I also have the results of a forensic financial audit completed just yesterday by federal investigators. It details exactly how Liam embezzled $60 million from my trust fund through forged conservatorship papers, dummy corporations, and offshore shell companies. Every dollar he spent to buy his way into this room was stolen from a 19-year-old girl in mourning. Liam's mask of the perfect gentleman completely, utterly shattered. The polished CEO vanished, leaving behind the cornered, pathetic thief I always knew he was." "Shut up. Give me that," he roared, lunging down the altar steps toward me, his hands reaching out to snatch the documents. He never made it. Before he could even cross half the distance, 2 broad-shouldered men in sharp, dark suits, who had been sitting quietly in the second row, stepped seamlessly into the center aisle. They moved with coordinated, undeniable precision, forming an impenetrable wall between Liam and me. They weren't wedding guests. They were the federal agents I had been quietly cooperating with for the past 3 weeks. "Federal agents," the taller of the 2 men announced, his voice carrying the undeniable, crushing weight of the United States government. He reached into his tailored suit jacket and produced a gold shield, holding it up so it caught the light of the cathedral's massive chandeliers. "Liam Sterling, you need to step back. Now." Liam froze mid-lunge. The last remaining drops of arrogance completely drained from his face, leaving behind a hollow, terrified shell. He held his hands up defensively, his voice cracking. This is a misunderstanding. You have no jurisdiction here. This is a private wedding." "Not anymore," the second agent stated flatly, pulling a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his belt. "We have a federal warrant for your arrest on multiple counts of wire fraud, grand embezzlement, interstate money laundering, and attempted bigamy. Turn around and put your hands behind your back." The cathedral instantly exploded into absolute pandemonium. The dignified silence of the city's elite was replaced by shrieks of shock and shouting. Chloe burst into hysterical tears, dropping her bridal bouquet. Her father, the governor, face purple with rage, physically shielded her with his body and began barking frantic orders at his own security detail to escort them out of the building immediately. In the VIP row, the illusion finally broke. Martha, realizing her stolen empire was turning to ash in seconds, sank to her knees right there in the pew. She let out a raw, guttural sob, her hands clutching her perfectly styled hair as the reality of federal prison loomed over her. Liam didn't fight the agents. He was too stunned, his mind short-circuiting as his perfect life evaporated in front of his eyes. But as the cold steel clicked shut around his wrists, he turned his head to look at me one last time. His eyes were wide, bloodshot, and filled with a toxic mix of pure hatred and utter disbelief. "You," he spat, his voice trembling with venom. "You were supposed to be locked away. You were broken." I took one slow, deliberate step closer. I wanted to make sure he heard my final verdict over the chaotic screaming of his ruined wedding guests. "You locked away a frightened, grieving teenager," I said softly, my voice as cold and hard as a diamond. "But you forgot that I am my father's daughter. You gave me 7 years of absolute silence to study the very laws you used to trap me. You thought you buried me, Liam. But I was just a seed. And now, the law is going to bury you." The agents turned him around and began marching him down the center aisle. The click of his handcuffs echoing through the cavernous church was the most beautiful symphony I had ever heard. He walked past the very politicians, billionaires, and socialites he had spent years trying to impress, head bowed in absolute disgrace. I didn't stay to watch the rest of the aftermath. The cathedral was drowning in the frantic shouts of lawyers, the sobbing of a ruined bride, and the shrill, pathetic wails of Martha realizing her stolen kingdom had just burned to the ground. Let them have their chaos. I had lived in my own silent nightmare for 2,555 days. Their panic was no longer my concern. I turned to the lead investigator, who had hung back as his team escorted Liam out. With a steady hand, I passed him the thick manila envelope. The original documents, the untempered financial ledgers, and the sworn affidavit from the facility nurse who helped me. "It's all there." The agent took the envelope, offering a firm, respectful nod. "We'll take it from here, Mississippi. You did incredible work. Stay safe." I turned my back on the altar, the crumbling dynasty, and the echoes of my stepbrother's ruined life. I walked back down the long center aisle, not as a bride, not as a victim, but as a conqueror. The wedding guests parted for me like the Red Sea, their eyes wide with a mixture of fear, shock, and newfound respect. I didn't look at a single one of them. Stepping out of the heavy oak doors of St. Jude Cathedral, the bright, unfiltered afternoon sun momentarily blinded me. I stopped at the top of the stone steps, taking a deep, shuddering breath of the crisp city air. It didn't smell like imported lilies or suffocating perfume anymore. It smelled intoxicating. It smelled like absolute freedom. My phone buzzed in my hand. I glanced at the screen. It was a text from my lead attorney, the one I had secretly retained weeks ago with the help of the FBI. "It's done. The judge just signed the injunction. All of Liam's assets are frozen. The board of directors has been notified of his arrest, and your shares have been legally transferred back to your name. Welcome back, Clara." A genuine smile, the first real smile I had worn in 7 years, broke across my face. The long legal battle in the courtrooms was just beginning, but the war was already decisively won. Liam and Martha had stolen 7 years of my youth. They had tried to erase me from the world out of pure, unadulterated greed. But in doing so, they had unwittingly given me the tools, the time, and the unshakable resolve to destroy them. They would lose the rest of their lives to the justice system. I walked down the cathedral steps, the sound of my stilettos rhythmic and strong against the pavement. I wasn't the broken, manipulated 19-year-old girl anymore. I was Clara. I was my father's daughter, the rightful CEO of my family's empire, and a survivor who had meticulously planned her own rescue. I didn't need to look back at the shadows. My future was finally mine again.